Hello and Happy New Year! Welcome back to Music Now, the Skinny's Scottish music podcast. In each episode we chat to some of our favourite musicians about their songwriting, and this time we're talking to Brìghde Chaimbeul. In our chat we cover Gaelic mythology and the rituals of songwriting, but we kick off by discussing her upcoming Celtic Connections show later this month. And then you're back in Scotland for Celtic Connections on the 21st for a slightly unusual gig. Can you tell me a bit about that? Well,
the gig... the gig is just my Sunwise album played live, and I'm collaborating with a musician called Shazad Ismaili who'll be playing like a bass synthesizer. On my Sunwise tour in September, Shazad joined me in London and Bristol, so yeah, I'm excited to play with him again.
Is it sort of adding a new element to those tracks?
Yeah, it's like, it's a kind of a slight arrangement because we have another element that isn't on the album, but Shazad really blends in with the sound of the pipes, and he kind of there to build up the layers of drone really and kind of add a bass element in there.
And other than that, it was just you on stage when you were touring the album originally?
It was, yes.
And do you use loops? Do you use loop pedals when you're performing?
I use some effects, yes. Not a loop pedal as such. I do use a granular looper and some other electronics, although all the sound is manipulated like from the sound of the pipes and however they're sounding live at that moment. Sometimes people ask me, or they might assume that there's like pre-recorded sounds in the gig, but there's not.
On the tracks that have your vocals on them, I'm kind of interested in the sort of physicality of it, because obviously singing requires so much of your core, and I imagine the small pipes also require quite a lot of your core. Is that sort of, I don't know, is there any sort of like physical conflict there?
Yeah, the one I found quite challenging to sing live is She Went Astray, because I'm...
Very rapid vocals.
Yes, and I'm pumping the pipes kind of on and off to get that effect in the track where there's kind of blasts of sound. So that's quite challenging because I'm moving both arms and then trying to sing the song at the same time. And yeah, it does kind of strange things. There's kind of like a lot of breath control required, or kind of you have to try and keep your body kind of quite still in order to be able to breathe properly. But other than that, I think the small pipes do lend themselves quite well to singing and playing at the same time, because like you're sitting, obviously the physicality is kind of, although the bag is quite close, to your stomach and your diaphragm, you're sitting quite open. So it does lend itself quite well. And of course, although I am singing songs, I'm kind of using the voice as like another texture or layer to the sound. So it's not necessarily, it has to be like the strongest or most, most important aspect in the track. It kind of, I want it to blend all together.
Yeah, it's like a lot of kind of contemporary pop music or what have you. In most contemporary genres, I would say, the vocals tend to sit sits at the front of the mix. It's like on top of everything else, and like it's treated as being more important essentially than the other instruments. But I think that's something that I really like in your work, is the way that the vocals are used in harmony, as it were, with the other instruments. I'm interested in the kind of story and themes of the album as a whole. I know you said that it's kind of there's themes of kind of ritual throughout it. So I'm interested, did you approach this project knowing that was what you wanted to work on? Was that knowing that was a theme you wanted to explore, or was it something that kind of emerged as you worked through it?
Yeah, I think what I started the project with more in mind was kind of the theme of winter time and that sort of turning inward, slowing down, darkness, these kind of aspects. And through my sort of research and writing, I came across kind of aspects of wintertime that were quite ritualistic, and I think it ties in to the way that I compose and I suppose perform, because it's ritualistic in a way that is maybe not, probably quite abstract, but I think the part of the rituals in this context that I was drawn to was kind of the circular motion, things just being quite constant and sort of deliberately circular. And of course, Sunwise became the title of the album. And it's always something I'm drawn to, is the idea of getting kind of right into the middle of a tune or of a sound or of a tone. And visually, to me, that feels circular. Hopefully that makes sense. Trying to describe what I imagine in my head sometimes it's hard to put into words.
But that's that's sort of the raison d'etre of this podcast. So thank you for trying. Because you mentioned the circular motif, which obviously features on the album artwork, that I love the artwork so much. It's just fascinating. What was the process like for developing that?
Well, the cover art is really down to my friend John Smith, who created the shape on the ground, and the photo was taken by Beth Chalmers. So it was kind of really to visualise what Sunwise is, I suppose, and it can be many things, but as I said, to tie in with the music, it was that kind of circular or thing that just goes on or goes round and round. And I suppose also that idea of community and gathering together, and there was a lot of members of the community in North Skye who came together to create that photograph. So very grateful for that as well.
It's very evocative, I think. When I look at it through the lens of thinking about sort of tradition and ritual, in some ways it's very kind of consoling. It's very, you see you think about it as this circle that's been trod by so many people before you, but it's also, there's something a little bit sad or almost futile about it. I don't know if that maybe speaks to my own mental state, but I don't know whether you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think there's a certain, I suppose, fragility there, and especially the barrenness of the landscape around that. There's maybe something slightly vulnerable in there.
So you spoke before about your work as a composer having a ritualistic element to it. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, I think it probably comes more down to motifs and sound aspects, rather than it being a ritual, a ritual in a way that we might imagine typically. I think my composition is always, there's an element of meditation and starting very slowly, slow developments, kind of getting very deep into repetitive motifs and things like that. And I guess to me that is kind of ritualistic, is kind of to have to sit down and get into that type of meditative or trance-like state. I think that's these elements I'm most drawn to when I start to compose a track or a piece of music.
Yeah, I think particularly on this album, there's quite a few of the refrains that are sort of mantra-like. Certainly I find that they'll be stuck in my head, and I'm watching a film or I'm having a conversation with someone, and it's I think particularly "She Went Astray" is it's kind of always ticking over in my head. So it's interesting that you say that. I wasn't sure whether you meant it could have been in a more technical sense. I wasn't sure whether you just meant, the ritual of sitting down and trying to write 5 melodies a day, or whether in the opposite direction it's like, communing with the muses sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's more abstract than that, I suppose. And I think ritual obviously can be anything, and I think we do associate it more with like, maybe like a more theatrical thing, or like a sacred thing that you do all the time. But yeah, I suppose for me it's like actually within the music and how that sounds feels like ritualistic to me, and yeah, as I say, ties in with like being meditative or just taking the time to get into a sound world quite deeply.
When you sit down to write, what tends to be the beginning point for you? Where do your ideas come from?
Well, my head is like constantly thinking of ideas, and I actually noticed, because I was on tour so much at the end of last year, that a sound check is quite a good place for me to get ideas, because often, you're playing for an hour, setting up the sound, and it's more the sound tech's job at that point. I'm just there to make sound. So I often kind of start to compose or improvise in those situations. But, formally my starting point is usually like going through the kind of Gaelic archive, so often on like Tupper and Dulwich or at the School of Scottish Studies. So I would most recently listening to a lot of stories, or just like accounts of things, and most of the recordings are taken in kind of the 1960s. So that's quite often a starting point. Also, songs, Gaelic songs, like a melody. If I hear a melody, that will often inspire me. And then, yeah, I suppose like folklore stories and historical accounts, and field recordings and things like that. So there's a mix of that and kind of improvising, and just constantly feeling and looking around wherever I am to, just be open to see if anything catches my eye or ear.
I'm always interested when I am talking to someone whose work is kind of in or adjacent to sort of the traditional music sphere, what the kind of balance is between writing original melodies and drawing from tunes that have been handed down. Where would you say the balance lies in your own work?
I think that it kind of, the balance changes. I think recently I have been writing more of my own melodies, but the starting point is always still like a traditional tune, or I'll combine both. Like a Gaelic is a good example of combining both, where like there's a traditional walking song in the middle of that. And yeah, I suppose for me it's thinking maybe in my own composition, maybe trying to kind of expand slightly on the traditional structure of traditional tunes, but then combining that with like structures that aren't as traditional, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's something that I'm really fascinated by in your work. How do you approach structure? Because it's, your pieces, they don't follow a sort of A, B, or like, verse, chorus structure. So how do you kind of conceive of structure when you're writing?
I think it's more about the journey from the beginning to the end, and like what feeling I'm trying to convey, which is often maybe to get out of your head. It's like more meditative, trying to kind of create a sound world that is a little different. Maybe, I don't think spiritual is the correct word, but just slightly removed from the present, I think. So it's more about conveying that sort of feeling. And I think there's like often a build up in the middle, and that maybe would be a typical structure. But sometimes if the track is more based on a traditional song or melody, like it's just fully revolved around that melody. Like She Went Astray, for example. That melody dictates the structure, and then so it's just kind of repeating that, and as I say, getting into the depths of what repetition, like what repeating a traditional melody can sound like. I think in traditional music and piping in particular, especially when you're learning growing up, you put like sets of tunes together. So you might do like a march, strathspey and a reel, or you'll do like 4 sets of reels, and you'll just play each tune twice. So I was always really intrigued about what would happen if I just played one tune for the length that you would play 4 tunes, type of thing. So I suppose that is quite particular to, the way I grew up learning the pipes, and it's a particular response to that like structure of tunes that everyone that you're just taught to play. So yeah, I think it's just playing around with that a little bit.
I think to me it also sort of evokes the idea that particularly when you're young and you're learning tunes, so much of learning is repetition.
Yes.
And you play something over and over and over until you're absolutely sick of it. And it's a sort of like, I don't know. I think that your music it's got a nice nod to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's probably just so embedded in my subconscious from those days of learning tunes. I just can't get away from it.
So you mentioned a Gaelic earlier. Could you tell me about how that writing process and development process looked?
Yeah, well, I think with this album, it's been the start of combining folklore a lot more with the music. So like the 2 and 2 kind of going together more than like my previous work. And Gaelic is probably the one. And Gaelic is also the track that kind of started the theme of wintertime, because it's written for a Gaelic Viar, who is a character that comes up in folklore in Scotland and also in Ireland as well. And she represents a lot of things, but mainly she is seen as like the character that sort of brings in the winter time. So, for example, if there was like a hard frost, people might say, like a Gaelic is here. So it's kind of very connected to weather, bad weather, cold, like the death of spring in a way, where the frost sort of kills any new growth, kind of thing. But I was quite intrigued in the stories how the bad weather and the frost and things not growing isn't necessarily a good thing, but the Gaelic is very, very like highly respected and revered. So I was quite interested in how she can be kind of feared or disliked, but revered at the same time. But yeah, she's such a rich, vast character, and there's many, many stories connected to her. But this piece was more just to evoke her coming in at the start of winter time. And Gaelic, there's a particular story that I was reading at the time, which inspired how repetitive the piece is, because she does the same journey every day, and she brings her cows to pasture, and she does the same journey every day, which is around 500 miles, but she's a giant, so that's not too much of a journey for her. So
where is the journey from, does it say?
in the story, it's from Eilean Erich off the Isle of Mull to Mull of Kintyre. So I think it's around, that's kind of the distance. And I first wrote this piece in collaboration with two dancers, which we performed, I think it was around this time last year. So that there was quite a sort of evocative, I suppose, performative element to the piece from the beginning. Not performative, but I suppose visual. Like the character was very present when I first wrote the piece, and then yes, I adapted it a little bit into the final track, what became the final track.
And you mentioned the walking song at the heart of it. How did you choose that song in particular?
Well, the main reason, because I love the melody of it. It again evokes that interesting trance-like repetition that I'm always drawn to. It's just a really haunting melody. But then the first line of the song is talking about "Get a night noch fuhr," even though tonight is cold. So the lyrics aren't necessarily, the main or like tied to the story, but they do have some elements of connection there. Of the woman is singing during the winter, and she's feeling the kind of emotional effects of that, and she's missing her lover and things like that. So but yeah, the first kind of port of call with that walking song was the melody.
I know obviously you've just said the lyrics are not necessarily pertinent to what you've done with the song, but I was interested when I read the translation of the lyrics, that her specificity around the shoes that her lover wears. That was how she sort of identified him.
Yeah, there must have been some good shoes.
I should ask you one more question before you go, which is, you've spoken quite a lot about the concept Sunwise, but for people who don't know, what exactly does Sunwise mean and what is its significance in Scottish folklore? Yeah,
so Sunwise literally means to go with the direction of the sun, and in Gaelic the word is Jaishal, and the word comes up in Duan the Gaelic, which is the kind of rhyme that is recited at the end of the track on Sunwise called Duan. And it kind of goes back to, I suppose, like Druidic or pagan rituals, where a lot of the rituals were, to do with the direction of the sun, and you would walk around you might see like the stone circles. Some people still do this today, where you walk around the stone circles clockwise, which is what Sunwise is. But there's a lot of accounts in any sort of Gaelic history of just doing things sunwise, whether it's like, at New Year's walking around your house sunwise, or gathering things in the direction, in the clockwise direction. And it's just meant to bring sort of good fortune. To go the opposite way is bad luck. And that kind of connects to the word in Gaelic tuahal, which is the opposite of jaishal. And tuahal also means like that you've sort of lost your mind. So yeah, I think it's like a superstitious type of thing that it had ended up being quite embedded in just Gaelic everyday life and culture, but I imagine it dates back to like when kind of Druidic rituals were very important in people's lives.
Thanks to Brìghde for chatting to us. She plays at St Luke's in Glasgow on the 21st with Shazad Ismaili as part of Celtic Connections. If you like this episode, check out our archive for chats with Catherine Joseph, Alice Faye, and others, and leave us a nice review. We'll be back next month. Bye.